Ronald Reagan on his favorite horse, El Alamein, welcoming you to his library here at Simi Valley, California. The statue called Along the Trail has a secret fireproof compartment inside containing one of Reagan's prized belt buckles and a piece of the Berlin Wall. Groundbreaking for the library began before Reagan left office in November of 1988 and opened to the public 3 years later. Fundraising and construction costs were paid entirely by private donations to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. The 29-acre library campus sits amid 100 acres of pristine land on top of the hill in Simi Valley next to Thousand Oaks, California. The library holds more than 63 million pages of documents, more than 670,000 feet of film, and more than 46,000 video and audio recordings.
We will finish our job. How could we do less? We're Americans.
As well as a recreation of the Oval Office during Reagan's time in office.
President Reagan, of course, saw our nation through historically tense moments in the world stage, namely in the final days of the Cold War. Now, a new administration is preparing to face several critical foreign policy tests with some of the very same adversaries. Joining me now to share his insights, former National Security Adviser to President Trump and author of At War with Ourselves, My Tour of Duty in the Trump White House, General H.R. McMaster, also the Fouad and Michelle Ajami Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution out here in California. General, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Hey, Shannon, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so a lot of serious challenges waiting the incoming Trump administration, round two for them. You said at one point you liked Trump's disruptive nature. You thought it was helpful. How does it factor into a second term?
Well, it factors in considerably, and that was like the best lead-in for a historian. Thank you for that, because we are dealing with a lot of the same adversaries and the same kind of complexities. And as when I took on the job as National Security Advisor in 2017, soon after the president was inaugurated, there was a lot that needed to be disrupted in Washington. And I think, again, President Trump, because of his disruptive nature, the Washington outsider, like Reagan was actually a Washington outsider, has the opportunity to challenge that conventional wisdom and put into place some really major shifts in U.S. foreign policy, I think especially in the Middle East at this moment.
What do you think happens there? Because I do have this from him. He has issued a warning on Trump on Truth Social with a post there. He says, if the hostages aren't released prior to January 20th, 2025, the date I proudly assume office as President of the United States, there will be, quote, all hell to pay in the Middle East. He says he wants those hostages home before he is sworn in. How do you think a policy shift happens with him in that situation?
Okay, well, first of all, I love it because there's been so much talk about, well, we need to cease fire in Gaza. We need, no, actually, until Hamas is destroyed, in my belief, you can't have any better life for the Palestinians, and certainly you have to get the hostages back. So I would like to see us working more actively with the Israelis and others to get the hostages back, but also to make Iran pay the price for their terrorist and proxy network across the region. There's a huge opportunity at this moment, Shannon, because of really what the Israelis have done to crush Hezbollah, with these recent attacks. Now you see how reliant Assad was in Syria on Hezbollah. The Assad regime is collapsing. And I think what you're seeing is those external arms, those terrorist arms of Iran, really countered in such a way that it creates a huge opportunity. Iran, I believe, has always been very weak. We act, we act like they're strong and have all this sort of language about de-escalation. But I think President Trump understands. He used to say to me, everywhere I look where there's a problem in the Middle East, there's Iran. And he's right about that.
So when you talk about opportunity, and he uses these words, all hell to pay, what are the practical things you think that he could or would do to handle that situation and differently than this administration has?
Well, I think some things are absolutely going to happen right away, which is really to tighten the grip on the Iranians from a financial perspective, from an interdiction of, their ghost fleet and so forth. Maybe secondary sanctions on banks, Chinese banks and others. China buys 97% of Iran's oil. So they're feeding Iran's ATM so they can continue these proxy wars against us, their Arab neighbors, and Israel, and employ this strategy of really expending every Arab life, to accomplish their aims of kicking us out of the Middle East and destroying Israel and killing all the Jews. So financial pressure, but also I think you're going to see military action against these Iranian proxy forces and maybe against Iran itself. Iran has conducted hundreds of attacks against U.S. forces and locations in the Middle East since the October 7th mass murder attacks against Israel. And we've only really responded to very few of those. So I think imposing cost on Iran, isolating Iran financially and economically, I think that's going to happen immediately in the Trump administration.
So the Reagan National Defense Survey asked a lot of questions about how people are feeling about all of these different challenges, and there was enormous concern from Americans about this grouping of Iran, Russia, North Korea, and China. That seems to have beefed up, if anything, those alliances over the last few years. How does President Trump, how does his defense team begin to dismantle or separate or divide the power that they found in working together?
Well, I think, Shannon, I would take an opposite view of this, of some people. Some people think you should try to separate them. I think we should glue them together. Because whenever we act like they're separate, they get to cover for each other and act like they're not operating together. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. The first major land war in Europe since World War II, and North Koreans are joining the Russians in their onslaught against the Ukrainian people. Now there's a Yemeni battalion going to Ukraine. You have the Shahed drones from the Iranians. Millions of artillery rounds, I think 6 to 8 million artillery rounds from North Korea transferred to the Russians. What do they get in return? I believe they're getting assistance for their missile program, probably their nuclear programs for Iran and North Korea. So this axis of aggressors, I think, has to be dealt with together. And this is why I think President Trump will come to the conclusion that it's important to support Ukraine in this fight, this defensive war, not just because, for Ukraine, which is important in and of itself, but because it's connected to these cascading crises in the Middle East and looming crisis in the Indo-Pacific, where China has become much more aggressive.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there because there are so many different fronts that we're talking about. So let's talk about Ukraine. Reuters says this, just summing up what we've heard from President Trump. He's repeatedly pledged during his election campaign to end the nearly 3-year-old conflict within 24 hours of his January 20th inauguration, if not before then, but has yet to say how. I know that you were critical of sort of the quick fix in Afghanistan and how that fell apart.
Absolutely.
Are you worried about how this is potentially going to come together? Do you think that President Trump has a plan for something that is long-standing, enduring with respect to that conflict and getting it done?
What I'm worried about is this kind of flawed idea that Putin can be placated, right? That Putin will come to some kind of a deal. Putin is determined to restore Russia to national greatness, and to do that by subsuming all of Ukraine and subverting all of Europe and subverting the United States. Look at what they're doing from a cyber-enabled disinformation campaign against us all the time. And so I think it's really important for President Trump to adhere to his instinct in this connection, which is consistent with Reagan, peace through strength. And so Putin, I will not come to an acceptable settlement, I don't believe, until he believes that he's losing. And so I would say step A, provide the kind of support that Ukraine's always needed. I think President Trump should criticize the Biden administration's approach of just meting out this assistance little by little. Tanks, no tanks, missiles, no missiles. Can you use the missiles or can you not use the missiles? How about giving what they need to defend themselves and then saying to Putin, you're going to lose this war?
Okay, I want to make sure that we get to China, too, which you mentioned. And in the survey here, the Reagan National Defense Survey, it was the #1 concern that Americans think that is our biggest adversary. And on this issue of whether or not or how much we should be helping Taiwan, 61% said they support increasing U.S. military presence in the Indo-Pacific region, and 55% say they are for increased arms sales by the U.S. to Taiwan. We know, though, that there are billions of dollars in outstanding sales that Taiwan has made a contract with us. We've not been able to deliver for a number of reasons.
Right.
So how does he come in and manage that situation?
Well, I think President Trump is pretty darn consistent in some areas, right? He's sometimes you don't know, is he going to be committed to Taiwan? What's going to happen in Ukraine? But some things are really clear. He understands the need to build up our defense industrial base. He understands peace through strength and the need to vastly increase our military capabilities. I think on Taiwan, that would be very attractive to him, that Taiwan wants to take responsibility for their own defense. I mean, I think it's $22 billion of backlogged arms purchases from the United States. I mean, that's good for the United States. That's American jobs. But hey, also, it's a heck of a lot cheaper to prevent a war than to have to fight one. So I think now's the time to portray strength. I think the president will do that not only from, I think, massive investments in defense, which we need. We're not big enough as a force. We have a bow wave deferred modernization, but also on our industrial base as well, and our supply chains, many of which are vulnerable to being interrupted by China.
Well, there is a lot for the new Trump administration to confront. General, thanks for discussing it with us. Great to see you.
Shanna, great to be with you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.